Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded hallways of Lincoln High School, her army camouflage jacket hanging loose over her small frame. The jacket was too big for her, clearly belonging to someone much larger, but she wore it every day like armor. Students whispered and pointed as she passed, their voices carrying cruel comments about her appearance. "Look at the wannabe soldier." Jessica Thompson sneered to her group of friends near the lockers. "Does she think she's going to war or something?" Sarah kept her eyes forward, clutching her worn backpack tighter. The camouflage jacket had been her father's, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before he died in a car accident 2 years ago. Since then, Sarah's mother worked double shifts at the local diner just to keep their small apartment, and Sarah wore the jacket as her only connection to the father she missed desperately. The mockery wasn't new. It started the first day she wore the jacket to school 6 months ago. Her classmates didn't understand why a quiet 17-year-old girl would choose to dress like a soldier. They called her names like G.I. Jane and Army Brat, making her feel even more isolated than before. Sarah had always been shy, but losing her father had made her withdraw completely from social situations. During lunch, Sarah sat alone at a corner table in the cafeteria, picking at her sandwich while groups of students laughed and chatted around her. The popular kids dominated the center tables, their designer clothes and confident voices a stark contrast to Sarah's quiet presence. She pulled out a worn photograph from her jacket pocket, showing her father in his military uniform, his proud smile beaming at the camera. "Miss him every day, Dad," she whispered to the photo before quickly putting it away as more students walked past, some deliberately bumping into her chair. The afternoon brought the worst part of Sarah's day, physical education class. Coach Williams had announced they would be playing flag football on the main field, the same field where the varsity team practiced and where most school events took place. Sarah dreaded any activity that put her in the spotlight, knowing her classmates would find new ways to torment her. As students gathered on the field, Sarah hung back, hoping to blend into the background. Her camouflage jacket stood out even more in the bright afternoon sunlight, making her an easy target for ridicule. The cool October air whipped across the field, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of traffic from the nearby highway. "Team's captains, pick your players," Coach Williams announced, pointing to Brad Morrison and Kelly Foster, 2 of the most athletic students in class. The selection process was torture for Sarah. One by one, students were chosen until only she and Tommy Chen, a boy with thick glasses who was equally unpopular, remained. Brad rolled his eyes dramatically before reluctantly calling Sarah's name, making it clear she was his last choice. "Great. We get the Army reject," Brad muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, causing several students to snicker. Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she said nothing. She had learned that responding only made things worse. Instead, she focused on the feeling of her father's jacket around her shoulders, imagining his encouraging voice telling her to stay strong. The game began poorly for Sarah's team. She stayed on the sidelines mostly, watching as her teammates dominated the field. When Coach Williams finally called her in during the 4th quarter, several students groaned audibly. "Don't mess this up, Martinez," Brad called out as Sarah jogged onto the field. The opposing team immediately targeted her, seeing her as the weakest link. When the quarterback threw the ball in her direction, Sarah surprised everyone by catching it cleanly. Her father's lessons about hand-eye coordination from childhood finally paying off. She ran several yards before being tagged, drawing shocked looks from her classmates. "Lucky catch," someone yelled from the sidelines. As the game continued, dark clouds began gathering overhead and a strange rumbling sound echoed across the field. At first, everyone assumed it was thunder from the approaching storm. The sound grew louder and more distinct, causing students to look around confused. Sarah recognized the sound immediately. Growing up on military bases, she knew the distinctive whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter rotors. Her heart began racing as the sound grew closer, and she looked up at the sky, searching for the source. The other students continued playing, oblivious to what was approaching. Coach Williams blew his whistle, frustrated by the noise disrupting his class. The rumbling grew so loud that conversation became difficult, and finally other students began looking up as well. Sarah's eyes widened as she spotted a dark shape moving across the cloudy sky. The aircraft was still distant, but she could tell it was military. Her pulse quickened as memories flooded back of visiting her father at various bases, watching helicopters take off and land during training exercises. "What is that noise?" Kelly Foster asked, shading her eyes with her hand as she scanned the horizon. The sound was unmistakable now, the deep thrum of powerful rotors cutting through the air. Sarah stood frozen on the field, her father's jacket suddenly feeling heavier on her shoulders. She thought about all the stories he had told her about military aircraft, about the brave men and women who flew dangerous missions to protect others. As the helicopter grew closer, Sarah could see it was painted in military colors. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what type of aircraft it was. The distinctive shape and size could only mean one thing. It was a Black Hawk helicopter, the same type her father had flown in during his deployments. The other students were starting to notice now, pointing at the sky and chattering excitedly, but Sarah remained silent, watching as the helicopter approached their small town, wondering why a military aircraft would be flying over their high school football field on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The sound grew so loud that Coach Williams finally stopped the game entirely, gathering his students together as they all stared up at the approaching Black Hawk. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pulled her father's jacket tighter around herself, feeling as though this moment was somehow connected to him, though she couldn't understand how or why. The Black Hawk helicopter descended slowly toward the football field, its powerful rotors creating a windstorm that sent leaves and debris swirling across the grass. Students pressed their hands to their ears trying to block out the deafening noise, while others held onto their clothes to prevent them from being blown away. Sarah stood transfixed, watching as the massive aircraft settled onto the field with practiced precision. The pilot shut down the engines gradually, and the rotor blades began to slow their spinning. Through the cockpit windows, she could see figures in military uniforms, their faces hidden behind aviator sunglasses and flight helmets. Coach Williams tried to maintain order, shouting over the diminishing noise for his students to stay back and form a line at the edge of the field, but his voice was barely audible, and most students ignored him, crowding forward to get a better look at the unexpected visitors. "Everyone stay calm," Coach Williams yelled, waving his arms frantically. This is probably just a routine training exercise, but Sarah knew better. Military helicopters didn't just land at random high schools for training. Something important was happening, and somehow she felt connected to it. Her heart pounded as she watched the crew door slide open, revealing several uniformed figures inside. The first person to emerge was a tall woman in an army dress uniform, her posture straight and commanding. She wore the rank insignia of a major, and her presence immediately commanded respect. Behind her came two more soldiers, also in dress uniforms, their expressions serious and professional. Principal Davis came running from the school building, clearly flustered by the unexpected arrival. He approached the military personnel with obvious nervousness, adjusting his tie and trying to appear composed despite the extraordinary circumstances. "I'm Major Jennifer Walsh," the woman announced, her voice carrying clearly across the field now that the helicopter noise had subsided. "We're looking for Sarah Martinez." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Every eye on the field turned toward her, and she felt her knees go weak. The cruel whispers and mocking laughter from her classmates suddenly stopped, replaced by shocked silence and confused stares. "Sarah Martinez?" Principal Davis repeated, looking around the group of students. She's right here. Sarah, please step forward." Sarah's legs felt like lead as she slowly walked toward the military personnel. Her classmates parted to create a path, their expressions ranging from amazement to bewilderment. The same students who had been ridiculing her just minutes before now watched in stunned silence as the girl they had dismissed as weird became the center of unprecedented attention. Major Walsh approached, Sarah with a respectful bearing, her eyes taking in the teenager's camouflage jacket with recognition and understanding. "Sarah Martinez, daughter of Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "I'm honored to meet you," Major Walsh said, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "Your father was a remarkable soldier and an even better man. We've come here today to honor his memory and to honor you." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, confusion mixing with pride and grief. She glanced around at her classmates, seeing their faces filled with shock and dawning realization. Brad Morrison, who had been making fun of her just moments before, stood with his mouth open, unable to process what he was witnessing. "I don't understand," Sarah said quietly. "Why are you here? What's happening?" Major Walsh smiled gently, her professional demeanor softening with genuine warmth. "Your father's sacrifice has not been forgotten, Sarah. Today marks the 2nd anniversary of his death, and the Army wanted to honor both his service and the courage you've shown in keeping his memory alive." The Major gestured toward the helicopter, where the other soldiers were removing a large case and several items. "We've brought some things that belong to your father. Items that were meant to be presented to your family in a proper ceremony. Unfortunately, bureaucratic delays prevented that from happening until now." Sarah watched in amazement as the soldiers carried a folded American flag, a shadow box containing her father's medals and decorations, and several framed photographs toward where she stood. The weight of the moment began to sink in, and she realized that everything was about to change. "But how did you find me here?" Sarah asked, still struggling to understand. "Your father wrote letters about you," Major Walsh explained. "He talked about how proud he was of his daughter, how you wanted to follow in his footsteps and serve your country. When we learned that you had been wearing his jacket to school every day, keeping his memory alive despite facing ridicule from your peers, we knew we had to do something special." The revelation sent murmurs through the crowd of students. Jessica Thompson, who had been particularly cruel in her comments about Sarah's jacket, took a step backward, her face pale with the realization of what she had been mocking. "Your father's commanding officer specifically requested that we honor you publicly," Major Walsh continued. "He wanted your community to understand the sacrifice your family has made and the strength you've shown in dealing with that loss." Sarah looked down at her father's jacket, seeing it with new eyes. What had been a source of comfort and connection to her father was now being recognized as something much more significant. The camouflage pattern that had made her a target for ridicule was actually a symbol of honor and sacrifice. "We have something else for you," Major Walsh said, nodding to one of the soldiers who stepped forward with a smaller case. "Your father earned a Bronze Star for his actions during his final deployment. This medal was meant to be presented to your family, but we wanted you to have it in a way that would honor both his service and your strength." The soldier opened the case to reveal a gleaming Bronze Star medal, its ribbon pristine and its meaning profound. Sarah had heard her father mention medals before, but she had never fully understood their significance until this moment. Coach Williams and Principal Davis stood nearby, both clearly moved by what they were witnessing. The coach, who had always seen Sarah as a quiet, unremarkable student, was beginning to understand that there was much more to her story than anyone had realized. "Sarah," Major Walsh said formally, "on behalf of the United States Army and a grateful nation, we present you with your father's Bronze Star Medal, awarded for his heroic service in Afghanistan. We also want to present you with this certificate of appreciation for the courage and dignity you have shown in honoring his memory." As Sarah accepted the medal case, her hands trembling slightly, she realized that every student on the field was watching her with new respect and understanding. The girl they had called names and treated as an outsider was being honored by the United States Army on their school football field. The ceremony continued as Major Walsh gestured for everyone to gather closer. The football field had transformed from a place of teenage games into something sacred and solemn. Sarah held her father's Bronze Star medal case against her chest, feeling the weight of its significance while trying to process everything that was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," Major Walsh addressed the assembled students and faculty, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. "Today you are witnessing something very special. This young woman has carried herself with dignity and honor while facing circumstances that would challenge anyone." Sarah glanced around at her classmates, seeing expressions she had never seen before. Brad Morrison, who had called her names just an hour earlier, looked ashamed and uncomfortable. Kelly Foster had tears in her eyes, clearly moved by the unfolding ceremony. Even Jessica Thompson, who had been the cruelest in her remarks about Sarah's appearance, stood silently with her head bowed. "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez died serving his country," Major Walsh continued, "but his greatest achievement was not his military service, impressive though it was. His greatest achievement was raising a daughter who would honor his memory with such grace and strength." Principal Davis stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. He had been an educator for 25 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. Major Walsh, on behalf of Lincoln High School, I want to apologize. We should have known about Sarah's situation, should have understood what she was going through. There's no need for apologies, Major Walsh replied firmly. Sarah chose to carry this burden quietly, just as her father would have wanted. She didn't seek attention or sympathy. She simply honored his memory in the way she knew how. One of the other soldiers, a sergeant with multiple deployment patches on his uniform, stepped forward carrying a large photograph. It showed Staff Sergeant Martinez in his dress uniform, smiling proudly at the camera. The image was professionally mounted and framed, clearly prepared specifically for this ceremony. This photograph was taken just before your father's final deployment. The sergeant explained to Sarah. He asked that it be given to you when you turned 18, along with a letter he wrote. Since today marks the anniversary of his passing, we felt it was appropriate to present these items now. Sarah accepted the photograph with shaking hands, staring at her father's familiar face. She remembered when this picture was taken, how handsome he looked in his uniform, how proud she had been to be his daughter. The memory of that day brought fresh tears to her eyes, but also a warmth she hadn't felt in months. There's also this, Major Walsh said, producing a sealed envelope from her jacket pocket. Your father wrote this letter specifically for you to read when you were older. He wanted you to understand his choices and to know how much he loved you. The letter felt heavy in Sarah's hands, as if it contained all the conversations she wished she could still have with her father. She tucked it carefully into her jacket pocket, knowing she would read it privately when she was ready. Coach Williams approached the group, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by genuine emotion. Sarah, I owe you an apology too. I never took the time to understand what you were dealing with. From now on, things are going to be different. We all owe her an apology, came a voice from the crowd of students. Everyone turned to see Tommy Chen, the quiet boy who was often picked on himself, stepping forward. Sarah never did anything to deserve the way we treated her. We were all just too ignorant to understand what that jacket really meant. His words seemed to break a dam of emotion among the students. Several began crying, clearly affected by the realization of how they had behaved toward someone who was grieving and trying to honor her father's memory. Jessica Thompson surprised everyone by walking directly up to Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I said terrible things about you and I didn't know. I didn't understand. Can you ever forgive me? Sarah looked at the girl who had tormented her for months, seeing genuine remorse and regret in her eyes. The old Sarah might have turned away, might have held onto the hurt and anger, but standing there in her father's jacket holding his Bronze Star medal, she felt something different. She felt the strength and forgiveness that her father would have wanted her to show. It's okay, Jessica, Sarah said quietly. You didn't know. None of you knew. Major Walsh watched this exchange with approval, recognizing the mature grace that Sarah was displaying. This is exactly the kind of character your father wrote about in his letters, she told Sarah. He said you had the heart of a true soldier, someone who could face adversity with dignity and respond to cruelty with kindness. The ceremony was beginning to draw attention from beyond the school. Several cars had pulled over on the nearby road, their drivers getting out to see what was happening. A few parents who lived in the neighborhood had walked over. Drawn by the sight of the military helicopter on the school grounds, Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across from the school, approached Principal Davis with curiosity. When she learned what was happening, she immediately began calling other parents and community members. Word was spreading quickly through their small town that something extraordinary was taking place at Lincoln High School. Sarah, Major Walsh said, checking her watch, we have one more presentation to make. But first I'd like you to meet someone special. She gestured toward the helicopter, where another figure was emerging from the aircraft. The man who stepped out was older, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in military service. His uniform bore the insignia of a full colonel, and his chest was decorated with numerous ribbons and medals indicating extensive combat experience. This is Colonel Harrison, Major Walsh announced. He was your father's commanding officer during his final deployment. He specifically requested to be here today. Colonel Harrison approached Sarah with the measured steps of a man who understood the gravity of the moment. His eyes were kind but serious, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience and loss. Sarah Martinez, he said formally. Your father saved my life during our last mission together. He died protecting his fellow soldiers and completing a mission that saved countless civilian lives. I've wanted to meet you for 2 years, to tell you personally what kind of man your father was. The football field fell completely silent as Colonel Harrison continued. Miguel Martinez was the finest soldier I ever had the privilege to serve with. But more than that, he was the finest man I've ever known. Every day of that deployment, he talked about you. Every mission we went on, he carried your picture. Every letter he wrote home was filled with pride for his daughter. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. Standing on the field where she had been ridiculed and ignored, surrounded by the classmates who had mocked her, she was learning things about her father that she had never known, hearing words that filled the empty spaces grief had left in her heart. Colonel Harrison has something very special to present to you, Major Walsh said, her own voice thick with emotion as she witnessed the powerful scene unfolding on the small-town football field. Colonel Harrison reached into his jacket and withdrew a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was worn and weathered, clearly having been carried through difficult conditions. He held it with reverence, as if it contained something precious and irreplaceable. Sarah, this journal belonged to your father, Colonel Harrison said solemnly. He wrote in it every day during his deployment, recording his thoughts, his experiences, and most importantly, his feelings about you and your future. He asked me to keep it safe and give it to you when the time was right. Sarah accepted the journal with trembling hands, feeling the worn leather cover that her father's hands had touched countless times. She could see pages filled with his familiar handwriting through the slightly open cover, words he had written during his final months of life. He wrote about how proud he was that you wanted to serve your country, Colonel Harrison continued. He also wrote about his hopes and dreams for your life, whether you chose military service or not. But most of all, he wrote about how much he loved you and how sorry he was that his duty kept him away from home so often. The crowd of students pressed closer, all of them now completely invested in Sarah's story. The girl they had dismissed as strange and antisocial was being revealed as someone with a profound connection to service and sacrifice that none of them had understood. Brad Morrison, who had been particularly cruel in his treatment of Sarah, stepped forward from the crowd. His face was red with shame, and his voice cracked with emotion when he spoke. Sarah, I don't know what to say. I've been horrible to you, and I didn't know anything about what you were going through. Is there anything I can do to make up for how I've treated you? Before Sarah could respond, Colonel Harrison addressed Brad directly. Young man, the best way to honor Sarah and her father's memory is to learn from this experience. Sergeant Martinez believed that every person deserves respect and dignity, regardless of their circumstances. He died defending those values. The colonel's words carried weight that resonated with everyone present. Students who had participated in mocking Sarah began to understand that they had been attacking someone whose father had died, serving the very freedoms they took for granted every day. Sarah, Colonel Harrison said, turning back to her, your father made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you knew about the scholarship fund that's been established in his name. The Army has created a program to help children of fallen soldiers pursue higher education, and you've been selected as the first recipient. The news hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. She had assumed that college was beyond her family's financial reach, especially with her mother working so hard just to cover their basic expenses. The possibility of higher education had seemed like an impossible dream. The Miguel Martinez Memorial Scholarship will cover your full tuition to any accredited university, Major Walsh explained. It also includes a living stipend and funding for books and supplies. Your father's sacrifice is opening doors for your future that he always dreamed about. Principal Davis stepped forward, clearly moved by what he was witnessing. Sarah, I want you to know that Lincoln High School will do everything possible to support your college applications. Your grades have always been excellent, and now that we understand your circumstances, we're going to make sure you have all the resources you need. The gathering had grown larger as word spread through the community. Parents, neighbors, and even some local business owners had arrived to witness the extraordinary ceremony taking place on the school football field. Mrs. Patterson, who owned the local grocery store where Sarah's mother sometimes shopped, was wiping tears from her eyes as she watched the proceedings. There's one more thing, Colonel Harrison announced, his voice becoming even more formal. The Secretary of the Army has authorized a special presentation today. Sarah Martinez, in recognition of your strength, dignity, and dedication to honoring your father's memory, you are being awarded the Secretary of the Army's Award for Civilian Service. A third soldier emerged from the helicopter carrying an official citation and a medal in a presentation case. The award was rarely given to civilians, especially to someone so young, but Sarah's behavior during the most difficult period of her life had impressed everyone who learned her story. This award recognizes civilians who have shown exceptional dedication to Army values, Major Walsh explained. Your quiet strength and dignity in the face of loss exemplifies the best of what your father fought to protect. As Sarah accepted the award, she felt transformed. The shy, grieving girl who had walked onto this field just 2 hours ago was being recognized by the United States Army for her character and strength. The jacket that had made her a target for ridicule was now understood as a symbol of honor and remembrance. Coach Williams approached Sarah with visible emotion. "Sarah, I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll consider it seriously. Our school has never had a real leadership program, but seeing what you've accomplished, what you represent, I think you could help us start something meaningful." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, still processing everything that had happened. "I mean a program that teaches other students about service, about sacrifice, about what it really means to honor those who serve our country. You could help other kids understand these values in a way that no textbook ever could." The idea resonated with something deep inside Sarah. She thought about her father's journal, about the scholarship that would allow her to pursue education, about the opportunity to turn her painful experience into something that could help others. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I think Dad would like that too." Jessica Thompson, who had been standing quietly since her earlier apology, spoke up again. "Sarah, I want to help with that program. I want to learn more about what service really means, and I want to make sure no one else goes through what you went through because of ignorance." Her words sparked a response from other students. Tommy Chen volunteered to help research and organize materials. Brad Morrison asked if he could assist with presentations. Even students who had never spoken to Sarah before were expressing interest in being part of something meaningful. Colonel Harrison watched this spontaneous outpouring of support with satisfaction. "This is exactly what your father hoped would happen, Sarah. He believed that his service and sacrifice could inspire others to be better, to do better. Today you're making that belief a reality." The ceremony was nearing its conclusion, but Sarah could see that its impact was just beginning. The helicopter on the football field would leave soon, but the changes it had brought to her life and to her school community would last much longer. Major Walsh checked her watch and signaled to the helicopter crew that they would need to depart soon. "Sarah, we have one final presentation to make, and then we'll need to head back to base. But I want you to know that this isn't the end of our connection with you. The Army family never forgets its own, and that includes the families of our fallen heroes." The final presentation began as Colonel Harrison gestured toward the helicopter, where the crew was preparing one last item. 2 soldiers emerged carrying a large, carefully wrapped package that required both of them to handle properly. The crowd watched with anticipation as they approached Sarah. "Sarah, your father left specific instructions about this final gift," Colonel Harrison explained. "He worked on it during his off-duty hours overseas, and he wanted it to be presented to you when you were old enough to understand its full meaning." The soldiers carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a handcrafted wooden display case, beautifully finished and obviously made with great care and skill. Inside the case were carefully arranged items that told the story of Staff Sergeant Martinez's military career. Photographs from various deployments, patches from units he had served with, and small mementos from different countries where he had been stationed. "Your father was skilled at woodworking," Colonel Harrison said with a slight smile. "During quiet moments at base, he worked on this display case for months. Every piece inside was chosen to help you understand his journey as a soldier and as a man who loved his country." Sarah ran her fingers along the smooth wood, amazed by the craftsmanship and the love that had gone into creating something so beautiful. In the center of the display was a photograph she had never seen before. Her father in his dress uniform, standing in front of an American flag, But this time he was holding a picture of her at her 8th grade graduation. He carried that picture of you on every mission, Colonel Harrison revealed. He said it reminded him what he was fighting for, not just freedom in the abstract, but the specific future of his daughter and all the children who deserved to grow up in a safe world. The emotion of the moment was overwhelming for everyone present. Students who had arrived for a simple physical education class were witnessing something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The display case represented not just one soldier's service, but the profound love between a father and daughter that transcended even death. Principal Davis approached Sarah with visible emotion. "Sarah, with your permission, I'd like to display this case in our school's main lobby. I think it would be fitting for your father's story to be shared with every student who walks through our halls." Sarah considered the request carefully. The display case was personal and precious, but she realized that sharing her father's story could honor his memory in a way that keeping it private could not. "I think that would be wonderful," she said, "but I'd like to add something to it. I want to include information about the scholarship program and about opportunities for students who are interested in military service or other forms of public service." Major Walsh nodded approvingly. "That's an excellent idea. We can provide materials about various service opportunities, both military and civilian. Your father's legacy can become a gateway for other young people to find their own ways to serve." As the ceremony continued, more community members arrived. Sarah's mother, Elena Martinez, came running from the diner where she worked, still wearing her waitress uniform and looking completely bewildered by the scene before her. Someone had called to tell her that military personnel were at Sarah's school, but she had not been prepared for the magnitude of what was taking place. "Mia," Elena called out, rushing toward her daughter. When she saw the military personnel, the medals, and the display case, she stopped short, tears streaming down her face. Major Walsh approached Elena with respect and understanding. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Major Walsh. We've come to honor your husband's service and your daughter's strength. You should be very proud of both of them." Elena looked at Sarah in her father's camouflage jacket, surrounded by Army officers and her entire school community, and finally understood what had been happening. "She wears his jacket every day," Elena whispered. "I thought maybe it wasn't healthy, but she insisted. She said it made her feel close to him. Your daughter has honored her father's memory in the most beautiful way possible," Colonel Harrison told Elena. "She has carried herself with dignity and strength that would make any parent proud. Miguel wrote about both of you constantly, and he would be amazed by the young woman Sarah has become." The reunion between mother and daughter in front of the entire community was deeply moving. Elena had been working so hard to support them both that she had not fully realized how much Sarah was struggling with her grief and the ridicule from her classmates. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you more," Elena whispered to Sarah as they embraced. "I was so focused on keeping us afloat financially that I didn't see how hard things were for you at school." "It's okay, Mama," Sarah replied. "You were doing what you had to do, and today everything changed." Coach Williams stepped forward with an announcement that surprised everyone. "Mrs. Martinez, Sarah, I want you to know that Lincoln High School is going to establish an annual scholarship in honor of Staff Sergeant Martinez. It will go to a student who demonstrates the kind of character and strength that Sarah has shown." The gesture was unexpected and deeply meaningful. Principal Davis immediately voiced his support for the idea, and several community members who had gathered began discussing how they could contribute to make the scholarship substantial enough to really help. Students. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store approached Elena directly. "Mrs. Martinez, I had no idea what your family was going through. From now on, I want to make sure you know about all the job opportunities in town, and if you ever need anything at all, you just ask." The community response was spontaneous and genuine. People who had been strangers or casual acquaintances were stepping forward to offer support and friendship. Sarah's story had touched something deep in the small town, reminding everyone of the sacrifices made by military families and the importance of supporting one another. "Sarah," Major Walsh said as the helicopter crew began making final preparations for departure, "I want to give you my personal contact information. The Army family doesn't end when ceremonies are over. If you ever need anything or if you have questions about military service or the scholarship program, you can reach out to me directly." The Major handed Sarah a business card, but also something more personal, a small pin bearing the insignia of her father's unit. This pin was worn by every member of your father's squad. They asked me to give it to you as a symbol that you will always be part of their family. Sarah pinned the small insignia to her father's jacket, right next to the breast pocket where he had carried her picture. The gesture felt right and complete, as if she was accepting her place in a community that extended far beyond her small town. As the military personnel began moving toward the helicopter, the crowd of students, faculty, and community members formed a spontaneous line to shake Sarah's hand and offer their personal apologies, congratulations, and support. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, and Sarah could see that her classmates viewed her completely differently now. Brad Morrison was among the last to approach her. "Sarah, I know saying sorry isn't enough for how I treated you, but I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of high school making sure nobody else goes through what you went through, and I want to learn more about military service. Maybe there's a way I can honor your father's memory too." His words were sincere, and Sarah could see genuine change in his eyes. The boy who had mocked her that morning was beginning to understand concepts of honor, sacrifice, and respect that he had never considered before. As the Black Hawk helicopter prepared for departure, the entire school community gathered to watch the conclusion of an afternoon that had changed everything. Sarah stood with her mother, holding her father's Bronze Star medal case and his handcrafted display, surrounded by classmates who now looked at her with respect and admiration instead of mockery. Major Walsh made one final announcement to the assembled crowd. "Before we leave, I want everyone here to understand something important. What happened today isn't just about honoring one fallen soldier or recognizing one remarkable young woman. It's about understanding that heroism and sacrifice often happen quietly, in small actions and daily choices." She gestured toward Sarah, who stood quietly in her father's oversized camouflage jacket. "For months, Sarah has been showing courage every day, just by walking through your hallways with dignity. She chose to honor her father's memory despite facing ridicule and isolation. That takes a special kind of strength." The major's words resonated deeply with everyone present. Students who had been part of the daily cruelty towards Sarah began to truly understand the magnitude of their behavior. They had been mocking not just a quiet girl in an oversized jacket, but someone who was carrying the weight of profound loss while trying to keep her father's memory alive. Colonel Harrison stepped forward for his final remarks. "I've served in the military for 30 years, and I've seen courage in many forms. Some courage happens in dramatic moments during combat, but the courage Sarah has shown is equally important. The courage to maintain dignity in the face of adversity, to honor family and sacrifice even when others don't understand." As the military personnel prepared to board the helicopter, Principal Davis made an announcement that surprised everyone. Effective immediately, Lincoln High School is implementing a new code of conduct regarding respect for military families and understanding of diverse backgrounds. But more than that, we're going to start a mentorship program where students like Sarah can help teach others about service, sacrifice, and character. The announcement sparked immediate interest among the students. Tommy Chen raised his hand to volunteer as the first participant. Jessica Thompson stepped forward to ask how she could help develop the program. Even students who had never shown interest in school activities before were expressing enthusiasm for being part of something meaningful. Sarah looked around at the faces of her classmates, seeing genuine change and understanding in their expressions. The same students who had whispered and pointed at her that morning were now asking how they could learn from her experience and honor her father's memory. "I want to tell you all something," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke to the crowd. "My dad always believed that people could change and grow if they were given the opportunity. He saw good in everyone, even in difficult situations. Today, all of you have shown me that he was right." Her words brought tears to many eyes, including those of students who had participated in tormenting her. The grace with which she was handling the situation demonstrated the kind of character that her father had instilled in her. Even during their limited time together, Elena Martinez watched her daughter address the crowd with pride and amazement. She had worried about Sarah's withdrawal and sadness, but now she could see the strength and maturity that her daughter had developed through her grief. The shy, quiet girl was becoming a young woman capable of leadership and forgiveness. "Sarah," Major Walsh called from near the helicopter, "we have one last surprise for you. Colonel Harrison has arranged for you to visit your father's unit next month." You'll meet the soldiers he served with and see where he lived and worked during his final deployment. The offer was unexpected and deeply meaningful. Sarah had often wondered about her father's life as a soldier, about the people he worked with and the places he had been. The opportunity to connect with that part of his life felt like a precious gift. The soldiers in your father's unit have been asking about you for 2 years, Colonel Harrison added. They want to share their memories of him and show you the impact he had on their lives. You'll also have the opportunity to participate in a formal memorial service at the base. As the helicopter crew completed their final preparations, the community continued to rally around Sarah and her mother. Mrs. Rodriguez, from across the street, approached Elena with information about a part-time job at the town library that paid better than the diner and offered more flexible hours. Mr. Thompson, Jessica's father, who owned a local construction company, stepped forward to offer his services in maintaining the Martinez family's apartment at no charge. It's the least we can do, he said simply. Military families shouldn't have to worry about basic home repairs. The outpouring of support was spontaneous and genuine, reflecting a community that was beginning to understand its responsibility to care for the families of those who served. Sarah's story had awakened something in the small town, a recognition of sacrifice and service that had been overlooked. Coach Williams approached Sarah with a proposal that would formalize her new role in the school community. Sarah, I've been talking with Principal Davis about creating an official position for you. We'd like you to become our first student ambassador for military affairs. You would help educate other students about military service and assist military families who might enroll in our school. The position would come with a small stipend and would look excellent on college applications, but more importantly, it would give Sarah a platform to turn her personal experience into something that could help others. The role would allow her to honor her father's memory while building a bridge between the military and civilian communities. I would be honored to accept that position, Sarah replied, feeling a sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since her father's death. I think Dad would be proud to see his sacrifice helping other military families feel welcome and understood. As the helicopter engines began to wind up for departure, the crowd stepped back to give the aircraft room for takeoff. The rotors began to spin, creating the familiar windstorm that had announced the helicopter's arrival hours earlier. Major Walsh, Colonel Harrison, and the other military personnel boarded the aircraft, but not before each of them took a moment to shake Sarah's hand one final time. Through the cockpit windows, they could be seen waving as the Black Hawk lifted off from the football field. The helicopter rose into the afternoon sky, its mission completed but its impact just beginning. As the sound of the rotors faded into the distance, the crowd remained on the field, reluctant to end a day that had transformed their understanding of heroism, sacrifice, and community. Sarah stood with her mother, watching the helicopter disappear over the horizon, knowing that her life had changed forever. The girl who had walked onto this field as an outsider was now at the center of a community that was committed to honoring her father's memory and supporting her future. The camouflage jacket that had made her a target for ridicule was now recognized as a symbol of strength and remembrance. Her quiet dignity in the face of loss had become an inspiration for an entire school community to examine their own values and behavior. 6 months after the Black Hawk helicopter landed on Lincoln High School's football field, Sarah Martinez stood in the same spot wearing her graduation cap and gown, but still with her father's camouflage jacket underneath. The transformation in her life and in her school community had been remarkable and lasting. The Miguel Martinez Memorial Scholarship had opened doors that seemed impossible just months before. Sarah had been accepted to 3 universities, ultimately choosing to study international relations with a focus on military affairs. Her goal was to work with organizations that support military families, turning her personal experience into a career dedicated to helping others. Principal Davis approached Sarah as she prepared for the graduation ceremony. Sarah, I wanted you to know that the display case honoring your father has become the most visited spot in our school. Students stop there every day to read about his service and to learn about the scholarship opportunities available to them. The display had indeed become a focal point for the school community. Students who had never considered military service were now exploring options in the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Others were looking into civilian service opportunities like the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, and various volunteer organizations. More importantly, Principal Davis continued, The culture of our school has changed completely. Bullying incidents have dropped to almost zero, and students are much more likely to support each other through difficult times. Your example showed everyone what real strength looks like. The student ambassador for military affairs program that Sarah had helped establish was now being adopted by other schools in the region. Her work in developing educational materials about military service and sacrifice had gained attention from state education officials who were considering implementing similar programs statewide. Jessica Thompson, who had been one of Sarah's harshest critics, was now her closest friend and the co-coordinator of the military affairs program. She approached Sarah with a smile and a folder full of letters from students at other schools who wanted to start similar programs. "Sarah, we've gotten requests from 12 different schools to help them set up their own military family support programs," Jessica said excitedly. "Your story is inspiring students across the state to think differently about service and sacrifice." The friendship between Sarah and Jessica had become one of the most powerful examples of how people could change and grow. Jessica had not only apologized for her past behavior, but had dedicated herself to understanding military culture and supporting veteran families in their community. Brad Morrison, who had also been transformed by that day on the football field, approached the group wearing his Army ROTC uniform. He had enrolled in the program at his chosen university and was committed to following a path of military service inspired by Sarah's father's example. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you one more time before we all go our separate ways," Brad said sincerely. "That day changed my entire perspective on life. I know I can never fully make up for how I treated you, but I'm going to spend my military career trying to honor the example your father set." Sarah smiled at her former tormentor, who had become one of her strongest supporters. "Brad, you've already made up for the past by becoming the person you are now. My dad always believed that people could change if they were given the chance to understand something better." The graduation ceremony was about to begin, but Sarah took a moment to visit the memorial display one more time. Her father's photograph smiled back at her from the center of the case, surrounded by items that told the story of his service and sacrifice. Elena Martinez joined her daughter at the display, wearing a new dress that she had been able to afford thanks to her better job at the library and the community support that had emerged after that remarkable day. "Mija, your father would be so proud of everything you've accomplished." "I think he'd be proud of how the whole community came together," Sarah replied. "That's what he always believed in. People supporting each other and working towards something bigger than themselves." The letter her father had written, which Sarah had finally read privately a few weeks after receiving it, had confirmed everything she had learned about his character and his hopes for her future. He had written about his belief that his service would only be meaningful if it inspired others to serve and care for their communities. As the graduation ceremony began, Sarah took her place among her classmates, many of whom had become friends and supporters over the past months. The shy, isolated girl who had been mocked for wearing a camouflage jacket was now the valedictorian of her class, chosen not just for her academic achievements but for her leadership and character. When Principal Davis called her name to deliver the valedictorian address, Sarah walked to the podium wearing her father's Bronze Star pin on her graduation gown. She looked out at the audience of families, community members, and students, seeing faces that had been transformed by understanding and compassion. "6 months ago, I stood on our football field feeling alone and misunderstood," Sarah began her speech. "I wore my father's jacket as a way to feel close to him, not knowing that it would become a symbol that would change all of our lives." The audience listened intently as Sarah continued. "I learned that day that heroism isn't always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing to understand someone's story before judging their choices. Sometimes it's about recognizing that the person sitting next to you might be carrying burdens you can't see." Sarah's speech went on to challenge her classmates to look for opportunities to serve others, whether through military service, community involvement, or simply treating each other with greater kindness and understanding. She spoke about the scholarship that would allow her to pursue her education and her commitment to using that opportunity to help other military families. "My father's greatest victory wasn't anything he accomplished as a soldier," Sarah concluded. "It was the way his story brought our community together and taught all of us to be better people. That's a legacy that will continue long after we leave this school." As Sarah finished her speech and returned to her seat, The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. The applause wasn't just for her academic achievements or her speaking ability, but for the transformation she had brought to their entire community. After the ceremony, as families gathered to celebrate and take photographs, Major Walsh appeared in the crowd. She had driven several hours to attend Sarah's graduation, wanting to witness the next chapter in the story that had begun with a helicopter landing on a football field. "Sarah," Major Walsh said as she approached, "I wanted to be here to see you graduate and to give you this." She handed Sarah an official letter bearing the seal of the Department of the Army. Sarah opened the letter to find an invitation to participate in a national program that connected children of fallen soldiers with active duty units around the world. The program would allow her to visit military bases during her college years, learning about military culture and helping to develop support systems for military families. Your father's story and your response to it have inspired changes in how the Army works with families of fallen soldiers, Major Walsh explained. You've helped us understand that our responsibility doesn't end when a soldier dies. It extends to supporting their families for years to come. As the sun set over Lincoln High School that evening, Sarah stood once more on the football field where her life had changed so dramatically. She was joined by her mother, her friends, and many of the community members who had become like family over the past months. The field looked the same as it had that day in October, but everything else had changed. A shy, grieving girl had become a confident young woman ready to make her mark on the world. A community had learned the true meaning of supporting military families, and a father's sacrifice had become a lasting legacy that would continue to inspire others for years to come. Sarah touched the bronze star pin on her jacket one more time, feeling her father's presence and knowing that his story would continue to touch lives long after she left for college. The girl who had worn camouflage as armor against the world was now wearing it as a symbol of hope, service, and the unbreakable bonds between those who serve and those who love them.